Breaking news. Welcome to today's headlines. Obey UN order. Release Nnamdi Kanu or face the diplomatic consequences. Ejimako, Kanu's lawyer. Obey UN order. Release Nnamdi Kanu or face the diplomatic consequences. Ejimako, Kanu's lawyer. To my dear listeners, from wherever you're listening from, please stay tuned as I read today's news. In the event that the Nigerian government does not comply with a decision made by the United Nations UN to release its client, Nnamdi Kanu's Anthony, Aloy Ejimakor has issued a stern warning to those in charge of the country. On Thursday, the Anthony stated in a statement that Nigeria is obligated to comply with the directive of the United Nations that the leader of IPOB be released. He warned that an adverse diplomatic disagreement could arise if the Nigerian government does not comply with the UN's instructions within the next 6 months. You may recall that the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention of the United Nations Human Rights Council issued a statement around a week ago, stating that Nnamdi Kanu should be released immediately and without conditions. The United Nations has accused the government of Nigeria and Kenya of unlawfully arresting, transferring, torturing, and detaining Nnamdi Kanu. The Working Group on Arbitrary Detention of the United Nations Human Rights Council also requested that the government of Muhammadu Buhari compensate him for the arbitrary violation of the fundamental human right. Ejimako, in his statement, argued that the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention is a quasi-judicial body that has a subsisting legal mandate of the United Nations to consider and adjudicate human rights petitions against member nations of the UN. Its rulings or decisions, diplomatically called opinions, such as was recently issued in favor of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, are legally binding on Nigeria on myriad grounds, including the fact that the decision is based on the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, both of which Nigeria ratified several decades ago. Ratification is the means by which a nation makes itself subject to international laws and treaties, and by the provisions of Section 12 of the Nigerian Constitution and a plethora of decisions by the Supreme Court of Nigeria. Ratification makes Nigeria subject to whatever it ratified. It needs to be made clear that the UN Working Group is an integral arm of the United Nations Human Rights Council, which has the broader UN mandate to determine human rights issues emanating from member nations of the UN. It goes without saying, therefore, that as a member of the United Nations, Nigeria is subject to decision issuing from these UN bodies. It will be recalled that the UN body recently considered Nnamdi Kanu's matter and held that the removal of Mr. Kanu from Kenya amounted to extraordinary rendition. In clarification, the body further held that Mr. Kanu's arrest and transfer to Nigeria lacked a legal basis and due process of law in violation of Article 9 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 9 of the Covenant. In its conclusions, the UN body held that the appropriate remedy would be for the government of Nigeria to release Mr. Kanu immediately and accord him an enforceable right to compensation in accordance with international law. Without more, Nigeria is duty bound to implement this decision in its letters and spirit, and it is expected to do so promptly and to, within 6 months, file a formal report of its implementation with the United Nations. Unarguably, failing to implement this decision would mean that Nigeria is thumping its nose at the United Nations and potentially triggering a nasty diplomatic conflict that could make it in pariah state. In the event that the Nigerian government does not comply with a decision made by the United Nations UN to release its client, Nnamdi Kanu's Anthony Aloye Jimako has issued a stern warning to those in charge of the country. On Thursday, the Anthony stated in a statement that Nigeria is obligated to comply with the directive of the United Nations that the leader of IPOB be released. Now I've come to the end of our today's news. Please do drop by at the comment section and let us know what your view is all about.